Well, hi again. Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. It's Tuesday, February 24th, day 44 of the 60-day legislative session here in Olympia. This is Washington in Focus Daily, and I'm Carleen Johnson, state government reporter for the Center Square. There are 16 days left in the session, and this day started early in Olympia with an 8 a.m. hearing in House Finance on, drumroll, the income tax bill. You guessed it, Senate Bill 6346, and it was packed. They even had an overflow room that was set up for people to just sort of monitor the actual live hearing room. And it was colorful, literally, because we had union representatives there with their colorful scarves, purple, turquoise, green, to identify which union, I guess, that they're with. So those folks were filling the main hearing room. And we're going to get into some of the allegations that were brought up at the onset of the hearing. The chair, April Berg, brought up some of the stuff that we discussed in yesterday's episode about the alleged fraudulent sign-ins on the legislative page where people can sign in pro or con. So we'll jump into that and kind of fast forward to where we are here barely 24 hours after that all broke. Budgets came out a couple of days ago. Yay, budgets. So despite back-to-back deficits, we've got Democrats proposing another $2 billion in spending. And my colleague Tim Clouser will join us to dive into that. He's a numbers guy. He likes that stuff. The numbers are too big. I don't like them. And then an update on a controversial bill that we discussed yesterday that would allow a state board to decertify elected sheriffs. That hearing Monday was pushed to the end of the allotted time, and some who hoped to testify, including elected sheriffs, did not get an opportunity. So that's all coming up on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. So let's dive right in. Hearing room, as I mentioned, was packed this morning for public testimony on the income tax bill. This is, again, a 9.9% tax on income above $1 million or combined household income. So wife makes $500,000, husband makes $500,000, boom, combined. Anything over that they make is taxed at nearly 10%. Supporters say the money's critical to fund education, healthcare, some of it to go back to small business tax relief, and to expand the working families tax credit. So, as I mentioned, standing room only in there. And before testimony began, the committee chair, April Berg, who's a Democrat from Mill Creek, addressed something that we discussed yesterday, allegations of a whole bunch of duplicate sign-ins. So if you've ever signed in pro or con on a bill in Olympia, you can go in there, you can put your name. If you're a business owner, you can put the name of your business if you so choose, and then sign in pro or con. And that's just kind of intended to give lawmakers on that committee an idea of, how much support or how much resistance there is to any piece of legislation. As of Monday afternoon, there were over 100,000 people signed in con, or appeared to have signed in con. Just under 10,000 is the figure for those that had signed in pro. Again, some assertions being made that there are duplicate signers or people signing in when they meant to sign in pro, that their name showed up on con. So here is what Representative Berg said at the top of today's hearing.
I do want to make a brief announcement to call attention to something that you may have seen in the press. We have had, it seems, manipulation of our public comment system. Following stakeholder reports of impersonation, initial review indicates that there are over 19,000 duplicate records and over 200 people have been fraudulently signed in on the bill without their knowledge. This matter is being investigated further, and I want to publicly acknowledge the damage that's been done to this democratic process, as this fraud has called into question many of the sign-ons onto this bill.
Now, some opposed to the bill are suggesting that, the fake sign-ins might have been manufactured, maybe to take away from the fact that there is so much opposition to this bill. Steve Gordon with Gordon Trucking posted to X. He said, in part, rather than having any self-reflection within their base of support, they're more than likely staunched the bleeding here with this. Oh, first it was bots, now it's outright fraud. That's suggestion of bots was made after the first public hearing on this bill last week, when there were so many people that signed it against, and supporters were suggesting, well, that just can't be. There can't be 60,000 people that signed in such a short amount of time in opposition to this bill. So the bots suggestion was thrown out. Now it's fraudulent sign-ins. Going to be interesting. Going to take some time to, find out what really happened there, and if they want to make any changes to the system to sort of prevent this type of duplicate signing. I'm not certain how they can do that at this point. So despite the overwhelming number of people signing in con and wanting to testify against the bill, equal time was given to supporters, including Washington State Labor Council, Washington State Federation of State Employees, and progressive groups like the Economic Opportunity Institute. In fact, the first three testifiers were all folks in support of the bill. But in my opinion, the more passionate testimony came from opponents, many of them business representatives who are concerned the income tax is going to lead to capital flight, new business investment, maybe not coming to Washington. And others were just regular citizens who are concerned that the tax is eventually going to trickle down to be a tax on all income, not just the wealthy. So this woman, I want to share part of her testimony. She was pretty passionate. Her name's Adrienne Jones, and she testified near the very end of the hearing. She came up with her little boy sitting in the front row right behind the testimony table. So again, this is just a concerned citizen voicing her objections to the bill.
I'm here with my big long speech, but apparently nobody understands how income tax works. The top earners already pay 37%, and now we're asking them to pay 9.9. That's almost half of your income towards taxes. Not only that, they pay higher housing tax, they pay luxury taxes, they're paying gas tax, they're paying capital gains tax. They're going to leave this state, and we're going to be left with politicians and people that are low income. All the people that are making really good money for this state are going to leave. Every day I drive by a hotel that King County bought for $11 million, and it's been vacant since 2021. We don't need more taxes. We need Washington State to learn how to budget. They need to stop making it rain with our tax dollars and learn to budget.
So this hearing went a full 2 hours. At one point, we had anti-tax activist Tim Eyman. He got his microphone muted when he was testifying because he suggested that the bill's sponsor, Jamie Peterson, had personally contacted state Supreme Court justices about the bill to make sure it's going to hold up when it hits their desk. Peterson was asked that directly in today's Democratic media leadership media availability. I was attending that as well, and said absolutely not. And they were pressed a little further. Have any of the leadership members had any conversations with state Supreme Court justices about the constitutionality of the income tax? And they all said that there's been no conversations, no emails, that sort of a thing. So Senate Bill 6346, or the amended version of it, is due for executive session out of that same House Finance Committee on Friday. All right, now keeping with our taxing theme, we have House and Senate Democrats coming out on Sunday with their supplemental budget proposals, offering two plans to fill a multi-billion-dollar deficit, this sounds familiar, while ultimately increasing total spending. My colleague at the Center Square, Washington, Tim Klauser, put up an article on Monday after combing the documents, running the numbers. He's got his spreadsheets going. So Tim, give us the highlights, but these might be lowlights. So what did you find?
Well, we had several budgets come out Sunday night, so a lot to digest. But in brief, the operating budgets are what everyone really cares about here, with the deficit going on. In both the House and Senate proposals are roughly $2 billion more than we're currently spending. They both came out on top of Ferguson's proposed supplemental budget. The Senate operating budget proposal pulls $750 million from the state's budget stabilization account, which is essentially just our rainy day fund. So they want to plug around half of the deficit with that, while transferring $375 million from the Public Works Assistance account and a few other transfers totaling, I believe, a little bit over $1 billion. Now, the House wants to pull $880 million from the rainy day fund, still a considerable amount of money. I believe that's the total that Ferguson had requested that they use. And the argument is that, look, there's only $2 million around in this count right now. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great idea, but they're arguing that the account will be stable again by 2029. So the way these budgets work, they balance out over the next 2 years. But then in 2028, because there's a 4-year outlook, in 2028, they're anticipating both of these budgets anticipate deficits of around $900 to $950 million, and then they go rise to surpluses again in 2029. I believe both of the proposals say that by 2029 they expect to have $2 billion or more back in the rainy day fund. So they're saying that the money will come back, but I think that's still a question that's hanging in the air, considering the way the budgets have panned out the last few years. I mean, last year we passed a historic $9 billion tax increase, and with city and county taxes that were authorized through that, it raises that up to $12 billion. So I think a lot of people are skeptical with their budget plans.
Now, I wonder if they sort of got grander, bigger goals with their supplemental budget proposals because of the new revenue forecast that we got last week. There was another 800 and some million more than they expected to come in. I don't know.
Yeah, Senator June Robinson, she's the budget lead for the Senate for the operating budget. She mentioned that in a press conference earlier this week and said, look, that was a nice boost, but it definitely didn't solve their budget woes. I think it kind of alleviated the impact a little bit, but another considerable part of this budget is the reliance on this proposed millionaires tax, or what will become an income tax if it passes. In that, we're not supposed to see this revenue for a few years, but it assumes over $2 billion in revenue for it down the line. So when we talk about budgets balancing out over the 4-year term, that's assuming that the income tax or this millionaires tax, whether it stays that or they adjust the rate, that assumes that this stays in effect, that they are collecting revenue from it. Now, the voters have rejected a millionaire, or not a millionaire tax, an income tax 10 times on the ballot already. This millionaires tax is kind of, some Democrats have said it's the way to inch into an income tax, but it's almost certain to be hit with lawsuits and potential injunctions. And if that happens, it's going to halt the revenue and then kind of throw a stick in their budget wheel.
Well, 2029 would be the very soonest, right? That it would be going into effect. And I've been told that the legal challenges are likely to take much longer than that. And well, voters may end up with an initiative. We're not going to have a referendum on this one because that's written into the bill. We can't have that. But an initiative could well be on the ballot by November to undo this thing, before it's even kicking in.
Well, it was interesting in the Senate's budget press conference the other day. They were asked, we face back-to-back multi-billion-dollar deficits. Now the majority party wants to pass this millionaire tax or this income tax. And they said, how do you justify this? I mean, a year from now, are you guys going to come back and be making further adjustments? And Senator Noel Frame, she was in this press conference as well. She said, yeah, as with big policies like this, we do anticipate making tweaks in the future. So kind of, she spoke kind of referencing some of the sales taxes and other measures that they had raised last year that now they're coming in to roll back after seeing how detrimental they were, and kind of switching their focus to the millionaires tax. But I think it's likely, like Senator Frame said, that come next year, when we're back into budget negotiations, that we're going to see a lot of tweaks, whether it be to these sales taxes, the millionaires taxes, if it's not completely injuncted and thrown out, in whatever measures they pass to get by.
And I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, Tim, because there was a big chunk of new spending in both of these supplemental budget proposals from Democrats for these massive lawsuit payouts for, whether it's kids or adults in care homes that were neglected, abused, whatever, maybe decades ago. But we've got these just massive payouts. Taxpayers are footing the bill for all this. So now this budget says we need, $1 billion, we know, more for these giant liability payments. That was kind of shocking to me. A concession that the system's not working, but we're not quite ready to fix it.
Yeah, that's a side of the budget I need to do a little bit more digging into. But that's something that we heard a lot at the end of last session, over the summer, and then heading into the 2026 legislative session, is that the state's tort claim liability is massive, over $1 billion, and that's something that they do need to address. Otherwise, they're just going to keep paying these massive lawsuits, these massive settlements that are falling back on the taxpayers. And I think what they're doing in this budget to kind of press the brakes a little bit is raising the premiums for certain premiums that go towards paying off these tort claims. But I think that's something that they're going to have to continue to grapple with as they move through this session and then potentially the next session. I mean, it is a short session, but we do have, I believe, a little under 3 weeks left in looking at how the last session ended with a lot of the budget stuff coming out in the last few weeks. I think it's likely that we're going to see a lot of changes here in the coming days.
Oh, yes. Nothing but fun. So thank you, Tim. I appreciate you joining us on Washington in Focus Daily. Readers can check out Tim's story at thecentersquare.com/Washington. Okay, now for an update on yesterday's contentious public hearing before the House Committee on Community Safety regarding a bill that would dramatically change eligibility standards for elected sheriffs. Legislation looks to really give a pathway to remove elected sheriffs from office if they don't meet new requirements, including being in law enforcement for 5 consecutive years. This is Senate Bill 5974. And Democrats say it's really necessary to ensure public trust or restore public trust and hold sheriffs accountable. Opponents say it's really taking the power away from the people to put an elected sheriff in office, regardless of his experience. It's somebody that steps up and wants to serve, and if they choose to elect him, they should have that right. So the hearing was pushed to the last 40 minutes of the 2-hour public hearing in that committee on Monday, and many of the people who had signed up hoping to testify did not get an opportunity, including Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate Rick Cuss, who's running for sheriff, but he will not be allowed to assume office if he wins election, if this bill passes, because even though he has a lengthy military career and is currently a sheriff's deputy in King County, he would not qualify if this bill becomes law. And I spoke to him just ahead of Monday's hearing.
In 2022, I ran for sheriff. I got 50,000 votes in Kitsap County. I'm currently a deputy in King County, and my plan is to run again. I've been campaigning since November, and if this bill passes, I won't meet the minimum 5-year qualifications, despite the fact that I've been a naval officer on submarines, so lieutenant commander, retired, several leadership experiences, and then this bill will just kill the opportunity because I don't meet that requirement of 5 years, which is an arbitrary number that doesn't mean anything, because you can't compare someone that's working like me in King County, a high crime rate area, to somewhere like in a rural county. The experience doesn't match up, and so stating that number is just, it makes no sense, and the voters should be able to determine who becomes their sheriff. Despite the fact that in 24 years in the Navy, none of that time would count for this 5-year qualification. So if I'm given the opportunity to testify, I will be speaking directly on that. The fact that I've been campaigning, actively raising money, and all that would just go away just based on that. So I'm going to compare the requirement for 5 years in urban compared to like 1 year in rural, or the other way around.
Interesting to note that Cuss told me he was the first person to sign up to testify on Senate Bill 5974 for the Monday hearing, but the chair, Roger Goodman, never called him up. He texted, the sheriff's candidate texted me that he was really disappointed and really didn't understand. I did reach out to the office of Representative Roger Goodman this morning for an explanation on that. I have not yet received a response. We'll update you if I do get a response at some point. We did hear testimony from Walla Walla County Sheriff Mark Kreider, and here was him voicing opposition to this bill.
First, number one is the cost that is associated. This is another unfunded mandate that's going to come down hard on our rural communities, especially in places like Walla Walla, having to fund background checks on every candidate that runs for sheriff. Number two, I would like to address Mr. Lubbock talked about Paul Pasteur as the ideal sheriff. Paul Pasteur is the last sitting sheriff that was not CJTC certified. Every other sheriff in my tenure as a sheriff for 8 years is CJTC certified. The only sheriff that has been decertified during my career that I'm aware of is Sheriff Hatcher, and he was decertified after he was recalled and removed by the citizens of Benton County. Certification is not an issue. Professional standards are not an issue for sitting sheriffs and police chiefs across the city or across the state. I'd also like to address that we have a process for redress of sheriffs that abuse their power or don't handle their office accordingly to their voters in their county, and that's the recall process. This has stood in good stead for 137 years of Washington State's Constitution, and it works tremendously well. Lastly, I would like to talk about posses. The only county in the state of Washington that uses any armed volunteers is Klickitat County. Those armed volunteers are given a special commission by the sheriff in order to guard the courthouse. If they didn't have volunteers, they would not have any security at their courthouse because they don't have the funds to fund it. Thank you for your time. I strongly, strongly urge you to vote no.
So that bill, Senate Bill 5974, is scheduled for executive session in the House Committee on Community Safety before the day is out. So we'll have to bring you an update on that one tomorrow. So that is a wrap for now on day 44 of the session here in beautiful Olympia, Washington. I'm Carleen Johnson. I thank you for watching Washington in Focus Daily. Have a great rest of your day.